Okay. Well, so we have been talking about how we can know the truth of God. And we, first week, we talked about truth. What is truth? How we can know truth, whether truth's knowable, barriers to truth. And so the last 4 weeks or 3 weeks, including tonight, we've been talking about how we can know truth about God. Because obviously, if we can't know truth, then it's going to be awfully hard to know anything truthful about God. So, anyway, so we're on part four. Now, throughout this call, or throughout the last few weeks, I've kind of been laying out some reasons for the existence of God using some of the points here that have been demonstrated in my friend James Warner Wallace's handout here, which I copied and pasted because he makes it online available. But I didn't follow this outline point by point, but I have mentioned some of the same points. You can get this at his website, coldcasechristianity.com. That's a great website. You can find all kinds of resources on there. But I've talked a little bit about knowing God from the issues of the universe and what the first causes of the universe. I've talked about design arguments. I've talked about how design arguments are very intuitive with people, that they see a world of design. We talked about inferring the existence of a designer through observing things in biology, things in cosmology, things in physics, um, all kinds of areas of the things in the world that God's made. Just looking around the world through what God has made and inferring there's a God behind it. And then we spent a lot of time on those issues. And last week or 2 weeks ago, we went a little deeper. We talked a little bit more. I've also talked a lot about Aristotle's four causes, about how you can apply those to just about anything you see in reality. Of course, you can apply it to the universe and issues of the design, all the design we see in the world. And then we talked a little about some of the other things a couple weeks ago about why people think God exists. We talked about pragmatic arguments. We talked about existential arguments. People believe in God for existential reasons. He meets those existential needs like purpose, meaning, the need for security, the need for comfort, the need to know there's something beyond this life. Talked about some people believe in God just for pragmatic reasons. Christianity seems to make a difference in their lives. It makes a practical difference. There's a benefit from it, a utility, kind of like what Jordan Peterson believes about religion. He doesn't really necessarily believe it's factually true. He doesn't really focus on the factuality of it, but he talks a lot about the practical benefits of religion in people's lives. How it just makes a profound difference. So we talked about that. Then we talked about religious experience. I talked about that a couple weeks ago, about how a lot of people think God exists because of the argument from religious experience. I talked about some of the strengths and weaknesses of that. So tonight, and we a lot of these points about the beginning of the universe, the design of the universe, the design of the DNA, the origin of the information DNA are laid out in Stephen Meyer's book, The Return of the God Hypothesis. And if you notice in his book, um, you could talk about some sort of designing intelligence, some sort of designer or a creative mind or a God who has personality. And then he kind of argues that, that you've got to somehow show that the God that we're talking about is a personal God. It's not like an impersonal force. An impersonal force really can't create anything because impersonal means it doesn't really have a mind. I mean, it doesn't make choices, right? And if you're going to create anything, you make a choice, right? You make a choice to bring a universe into existence. You make a choice to bring an earth into existence or bring a human into existence. That's a choice from a mind. So an impersonal being couldn't do that, or an impersonal force of anything. So we've got to try to what we're trying to do is argue for really talking about a personal God, that we've been kind of laying out the case for a personal God. Now, obviously, someone could think that there is a designer behind the universe or designer behind planet Earth. Um, you know, those people are called deists, where they think that God, he created the laws of nature, he put them into motion at the beginning of the universe, and then those laws were tweaked a certain way to be able to get life going. That God kind of is the he front loaded everything, he's behind it, and then he let everything kind of play out after that. And that kind of leads to more of a deistic view of God, that he's not really he kind of tinkered with the universe, but he's not really involved in history after that. So that's not what we believe. We're theists, and we believe God acts in human history after he creates the universe. Obviously, he creates the first man, and then he forms the nation of Israel. Then he brings Jesus into the world. So God's doing a lot of things in history after the creation of the universe. Now, we've talked a little bit about, of course, that if we're going to do anything about God, that God is going to have to communicate, and that he's going to have to be the one to set the parameters of how he communicates. And we talked about visual communication. We talked about how we can observe certain things that God has done, and then we know there's a God behind that visual communication, such as the universe and the earth and your DNA and biology, the first cell and all kinds of things. Then we talked a little bit about we haven't gotten so much into verbal or written communication yet, because we'll deal with that when we get into the Bible. But the point is that people can know some things about God, certainly without the Bible. They can know there's a creator without reading the Bible. But then you get into history, and that's where we'll start talking about how God has decided to communicate through a specific written medium, which is a text, the Bible. And so when we think about God communicating through the natural world, it's only a partial knowledge of God. We don't find out everything about what God is like just by studying design arguments or studying intelligent design or studying the first cause of the universe. We don't get a full picture of God. We don't get a picture of the triune God, the God who is one God revealed in three persons. You have to go into history. That's where we have to open up the Bible, and we have to see if God has spoken further into history, which he has, which, he reveals himself in a deeper way. So, these things we've been talking about get people like part of the way, right? It's like a starting point, but they have to go further if they want to know what God's really like in all his character attributes. And they'll find out even more of how personal he is, of course, if they will go deeper and go into history and study what the Bible says. Now, if you think about it, if God is the starting point of knowing anything, and all knowledge is ultimately from God, that means just about everything in our world around us that we experience can go back to God. And just our way of discovering it finds its origin in God. Okay, like you use your five senses, they're mostly reliable, your five senses you use every day, because they've been designed by God. Now, obviously, some people have blindness, some people have deafness, some people have challenges to their senses. Their ears may not work real well, but that has to do with obviously the fall of the world. The world has fallen too. It's a broken world. We have sin, and our bodies break down. But the point is that, like I said before, just because a car is broken and it's not designed very well doesn't mean it doesn't have a designer, right? You might say, well, that designer didn't do a good job, but it just depends on what the issues are there. But the point is that how we know things, sort of sensory experience and through rational reasoning, like when we use our mind, we're appealing the laws of logic every day. Those are things that we can attribute to God. He has designed our minds a certain way that allows us to grasp, logical argumentation. Some of us can do it better than others, of course, but the point is that he's designed our minds. Our mind is not the result of an irrational and personal process. Okay. It wouldn't make any sense, because you're a personal being, you're a rational being. It would make sense that you come from a personal being and a rational being, right? So, unbelievers can use their senses, of course, and use their cognitive skills and can do logic and teach logic and write textbooks on logic, because God's what we call common grace is throughout the world. There's some things he's allowed humans to participate in, all humans, no matter whether they believe in him or not. That's his common grace on humanity. There's things that we just can do and we can know based on his grace towards us, even if we don't recognize him as behind it, right? So tonight we're going to spend a little bit kind of wrapping up the existence of God, talking about morality a bit. Now, of course, I've talked about this before, but there's a few new things I'll throw in here. But this is really important because you can talk about design arguments. You can talk about, hey, there's a creator. He designed the universe. He designed the earth. But some people might say, well, how does that impact my life? I mean, I know it sounds silly, a question like that, but sometimes I hear that. I don't see what difference God would make in the big picture of my life. I don't really see what difference it makes. Well, at the end of the day, whether you see that God makes a difference or not has no bearing on whether he exists. He either exists or he doesn't exist. So whether you see the need for him is irrelevant. The issue is he can still exist even if you don't see the need for him. But there is one area that impacts our lives on a daily basis that we can have some common dialogue, find some common ground with people on, and that's of course morality. Morality impacts our lives all day long. We have to make tons of moral judgments, have to make sometimes decisions, long-term decisions, short-term decisions. We have to think through things that have that involve a moral decision. It always involves a moral issue. Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it morally right? Is it morally wrong? What's the long-term consequences of this? Things like that. And so we make moral judgments just about almost all day, every day, right? So you have an ethical system. Everybody has one, whether they acknowledge it or not, and everybody has moral values. Those are the things that matter to you, and certainly some of those values are formed through your family, your upbringing, obviously your relationship with God. I mean, the things that drive your behavior. I value love, I value justice, I value mercy, I value there's certain moral values that everybody has. And those ground our judgments about what is good or bad, right? And so the moral values lead to our moral duties. You act out of your moral values, right? You say, well, I'm obligated to love this person. I'm obligated to show justice to this person. I'm obligated to show mercy to this person. I'm obligated to do this or do that. I'm obligated not to do this or that, right? Your duties flow out of your values, right? And then, of course, we all have, at least we generally want moral accountability, because I'm sure that you've had something happen to you, or you've seen something happen. You might say, hey, where's accountability for that? That's right or that's wrong. And I want to see some accountability. And so that's just part of our moral or ethical system, all three of these things, right? You can't get around them. Okay. Now, the thing we tend to ask is, something that we notice in humans throughout history, especially in the day we live in now. I mean, obviously, there's plenty of causes to fight for, and there's plenty of people that need a purpose, so they get involved in causes. But all these things they get involved in, these causes or groups um, or whatever they are, social justice movements, whatever you want to call them, social justice groups, whatever, I don't know. But the point is that all these groups have to do with morality, okay? Because there's somebody that joined this group or this cause or that cause because they think that they had a moral obligation to do something. And they generally join something or a cause because they think that thing is going to make the world a better place. Now, a good thing to always ask people is, why are you morally obligated to do this? Like, why do you sense this moral obligation? Why are you morally obligated to fight for equality, justice, and rights? And sometimes, they've not even thought it through. There was the 4 summers ago when I saw someone with a sign in downtown Columbus with the word justice on it, and I asked them where their concept of justice came from. They didn't even know. They hadn't even thought about it. They're just, well, I just know that this is right, or this is wrong, and I want to help. So I tried to kind of pin them down a little bit on why, the whys behind what they were doing. They just didn't really know. So this is a good question to ask people. Why are they so morally obligated to do these things? Um, you can always ask questions like, why do you care so much about the rights and equality of others? Or what makes humans so valuable that you fight so hard for quality, fairness, and justice? Fix my camera here. And, why do you think you are morally obligated to fight so hard for these things? And where does our idea of justice, fairness, equality come from? So these are real opportunities to open up doors of conversation about these issues, because there's so many people involved in these kinds of issues. Now, of course, for the Christian, the Imago Dei, being that we're created in the image and likeness of God, makes it a lot easier to explain these things, why humans tend to fight for humans and why humans tend to view humans as valuable. Not obviously, not all humans have viewed humans as valuable throughout history, obviously. But the point is that why do humans get so involved in these groups and causes and want to fight for other humans? It's because, we think that there's an imprint of God on all humanity, that he's placed this on all humanity, that we say we're creating an image and likeness of God, that we all have the right to enjoy the resources. Life is a gift from God. We have the right to life, and the resources to sustain it. That's just part of being an image bearer of God. We have a right to human dignity, the right to receive dignity despite how old or young we are, no matter what our gender is, no matter what our nationality or ethnicity is. We all are in the same boat because God has endowed that on all humans. We're all in the same place. Okay. Now, obviously, not everybody treats everyone like image bearers of God. We know that. And sometimes we don't, as Christians, treat people as image bearers of God. But we need to remember that God has, we don't earn these things right here. We don't earn these things. These are things that are endowed upon us just being the creations. God is a creator, and we're the created ones, and he's endowed these things on us. Okay. And so these views, or this basic starting point, has grounded human rights charters all across all countries for a long time, for centuries, decades, and centuries. You just have to think, if God doesn't exist, then what would give humans intrinsic value, dignity, and human rights? Why does anyone matter at all? If someone says, a certain people group matters, I understand what they're saying, but you may want to back up and say, why does anyone really matter if God doesn't exist? Why do you matter? Do you matter because you have a specific function, because you can do something? Do you matter just because you have a specific ethnicity? Do you matter? And who gets to decide why anybody matters? Okay. So the existence of God grounds all these things. Okay. And so I think that we need to pull people back sometimes, or just give them the opportunity to explain how they ground any of these things. Okay. Because, you think of people that fight for human rights, because some people are absolutely infatuated with it, whether it be women's rights, trans rights, gay rights, this rights, whatever people group you're fighting for, Palestinian rights, Jewish rights, whatever. Rights are linked to personhood. And if we're creating an image and likeness of God, then that means that we have rights automatically just for being created in the image and likeness of God, because of the essence of who we are. It's not based on what we can do or can't do. Well, you get rights because you do this, and you get rights because you don't do that, and you get rights because you perform this function over here. That's not the way Christianity views rights. Rights come to us automatically because we're creating the image and likeness of God. Now, obviously, if if you don't think God exists and that all reality can be explained certainly as just like a natural phenomena, meaning that you're just a cosmic accident, and you're just a result, you're just a moist robot, and you're just molecules in motion, and you're just the result of chemistry, and chemistry got reduced to physics, and physics, or biology got reduced to chemistry, and chemistry reduces to physics. You're just part of a giant accident. Then you're going to have a harder time grounding any kind of human rights and dignity. um, I've shown this quote before by William Provine, who he died. He was an atheist, staunch evolutionary biologist, but he once said in a debate with one of the founders of the intelligent design movement, he said here, let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear. And these are basically Darwin's views. There are no gods, there's no purposes, and no goal-directed forces of any kind. There is no life after death. When I die, I'm going to be absolutely sure I'm going to be dead, and that's the end of me. There's no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no free will for humans either. What an unintelligible idea. And he's gone now, so he certainly found out if that was true. But that's just the consequences of living in a world without God. Okay, there wouldn't be any ultimate foundation for ethics or meaning. There wouldn't be anything, right? It's just you create your own ethics, you create your own meaning, and you wouldn't really have, and free will would just be illusionary. It'd be an illusion. It's just something, would be something we use to help us get along in society. But most of them would say everything's deterministic anyway, that you don't have any choice. You think you have a choice, but you really don't, as they would say. Stephen Hawking, who passed away, I think 4 or 5 years ago as well, he said an atheist is, he was an atheist as well, brilliant physicist, but he said the human race is just a chemical scum on a moderate-sized planet, orbiting around a very average star in the outer suburb of one among 100 billion galaxies. We are so insignificant that I can't believe the whole universe exists for our benefit. That would be like saying that you would disappear if I closed my eyes. So as you can see, he has a high view of humans as well. A book called The Nature of Dignity, the author says human beings cannot be deserving of a special measure of respect by virtue of their having been created in God's image. We had not been created at all, and there is no God. That's the traditional conception of human dignity is also undermined the wake of Darwin. So he's just being honest there. The reality of a neo-Darwinian worldview is that humans are an accident of nature. You weren't intentionally created. You don't have any purpose. You're obviously a result of a purposeless process. It's completely a purposeless process that got you here. It has no purpose, has no goal, and we just got lucky. So definitely most people think people matter. We live our lives that way. We vote for specific people we think who will pass policies that will help specific people or people groups. We sometimes pick a career we think will help or benefit people. We generally don't want people to abuse or mistreat others. And, most people will say, when you ask them what the purpose in life is or what's your purpose, they say, I think I'm just here to help people. I want to make this world a better place. You run a lot of people that say that, like, I just want to make a difference. I'll make the world a better place. That's the goal. That's why I'm here, to make a difference. But, the reality of it is when they say that, they must have some sort of standard they're appealing to. They must know what a good world, they must know what the world must look like. They must know what's wrong with the world, and they must know what the world needs to look like. So they're appealing to some standard anyway. When they say, the question is, where does that standard come from? People matter plays a role in all the debates, because all the debates, whether you're talking about hate speech or genetic engineering or prostitution or, trying to stop legal drugs or alcohol or whatever it is, or shoot down hijackers or, whatever it is, anything that impacts people have to do with generally moral positions, right? How do those moral positions treat people? Are they good or bad? Are they hurting or helping? And what do we do? The reality of it is that if you want to claim human rights and you want to fight for human rights, you can only ground those rights. Generally, they have to come from an outside source. Okay. Otherwise, they're just going to be a personal opinion. Okay. you could say, you could say that some sort of law grounds human rights. We could say like natural law or the natural law that God's, like Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence, we'll talk about, and also the laws of nature seem to indicate there are human rights. Like when Jefferson said, he said, we hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. He was appealing not to the Bible. He was appealing to the moral law or the natural law that God's revealed in the natural world. It's self-evident. It's not so much you have to open the Bible to know that. And so he was appealing certainly to a creator who we could understand it's self-evident that he had created us. And with that, we receive certain unalienable rights. Okay. If you say our laws are the basis for a right, if you want to say that, then that's going to lead to problems because if if government has a problem goes out of existence or those laws get written out of existence, that means you have no rights. But remember, human laws only recognize God-given rights. Okay, so I think that it's pretty obvious that if you're waiting completely for if you're going to depend totally on government to give you human rights, I'm not saying it doesn't play a role, but there's some rights that just exist already because we're creating the image and likeness of God, and so they're not going to go away just because government takes away your rights or something. Just like when they good example when they passed the law of the land, when they recognized marriage is between a man and a man, a woman and a woman, they recognize gay marriage. That law may be the law of the land, but that doesn't change the way God sees it. It just doesn't take away what God intended for marriage. Just because there's now a law in place in government that recognizes gay marriage, that doesn't mean it's morally right. And it certainly doesn't mean that the other view of marriage that's between a man and a woman has gone away. Okay. Because obviously God's laws would supersede any governmental law. Um, so, I mean, you certainly have to abide by governmental laws. I'm saying that some laws God has given that supersede those and will never change. They're unchanging. Um, Now, as I say, without God, human rights would amount to your subjective preferences. So you can fight for abortion rights, same-sex marriage rights, gender rights, transgender rights, whatever, but it'd be very hard to justify them as truly being rights. Okay. And obviously people are caught up in this. They fight for these rights, but they don't think about how they grounded in human rights. They don't think about where they come from. So what you're trying to do is the goal would be to try to get somebody to recognize that if they want to be at the center of everything and don't think God exists, then certainly they can be the one who determines their own set of moral values and moral duties, and they can be the one to determine what people group has value, dignity, and rights, and they can say, I have a certain standard for the way the world should look, and I determine happiness is. And without God at the center, then certainly it's up to the individual, right? You are at the center of everything. But if God is at the center and he's the transcendent source, then there is an objective source and also one that is unchanging. And this one back here, obviously, if it's just up to you personally, then obviously your moral values and moral duties may shift and change continuously because of culture. The world changes constantly. You're changing. People change. Circumstances change. So there's no stability there at all. Really, nothing is stable. Nothing stays the same. But I mean, with God as a transcendent source, then throughout history and continuing on, all humans are equal, all have dignity and intrinsic value. Our value isn't based on usefulness or productivity, and we're morally obligated to treat people as image bearers of God. And so, if God exists, he grounds all those things, and it's just an ongoing thing. It's not like it goes away. It's not like it changes tomorrow, like, well, God was the transcendent source of that, and tomorrow it's something else. No, he is the unchanging transcendent source, okay, of all those things. Nothing shifts or changes. And that's why, is the author of this book says, Why People Matter. He says only when human significance is alien, rooted not in ourselves, but in something or someone outside of ourselves, is human dignity inalienable, unlosable, and unshakable. In the end, God is why people matter. Okay. There is no fixed reference point. There's nothing else to go to. If you want to go to society, if you want to go to the individual, you want to go to government, all those things are shifting nonstop. They can't ground human dignity and rights and value. They can't. Now, let me move on here. So, have you ever noticed, though, people's moral reactions? One way to argue that morality matters to people and asking them, it's a good thing to ask why sometimes people have these moral reactions when they do. So obvious in people. When they see like a genocide and they say, oh, that's awful, that's wrong, that's morally wrong, that's evil, right? That's our moral reaction, right? A moral reaction to what we see. Many genocides throughout history. Someone would say, I can't believe anyone would do that. That's just evil. That's just morally wrong. That's unfair, right? Or, when we were watching 9/11 take place, many of us remember where we were that day because it's a high impact event. It will be remembered for decades later. You'll be able to remember where you were on that day probably when you're 90 years old. Okay, because that's the way high impact events are. Just like the disciples who saw Jesus rise from the dead, they could remember that event decades later because it was a high impact event. So 9/11, what happened when you turned on the TV and you saw what was happening? I remember I was at work. I was getting trained at Sprint PCS at the time. My wife called me. So are they watching? Are you watching the TV? And we turned it on in the break room and saw these people trying to jump out of buildings and trying to figure out what to do. And what are the moral reactions that we had? This is wrong. This is evil. This is unjust. There needs to be justice for this. There were serious moral reactions happening, right? Out of our mouths and in our hearts. We could just tell, the moral reactions were all over the place, right? And like I said, same thing with the reaction to genocides. And, most recently, some people saw what happened with the recovery of the victims in Israel last week with the two babies that got returned and the other things, and then Hamas celebrating it and all over the news, and obviously the moral reactions. I saw the headlines: evil, 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 evil. Podcast evil has shown its face, evil, it's wrong, it's morally wrong. So, or some people might think it's morally right. I mean, apparently there's people in Gaza that think it was morally justifiable what they did. But the point is that we see things; these things reveal our moral intuitions and our moral reactions. I mean, if you're going to argue over transgenderism and whether men can undress in girls' bathrooms, and girls have to sit there and have a male inside their bathroom, or whether minors can cut off their body parts because they want to transition to different, they want to become a male or female and attempt to change their biological sex, which can't be changed. If you're going to argue for those kinds of things, that's a moral position. Okay, you're arguing that you think it should be morally permissible for men to undress in women's locker rooms or compete in women's sports, or you think it should be morally permissible for minors to cut off their body parts in transition. Okay, over 5,700 American children have had trans surgery between 2019 2023. Obviously, some of them detransition now, but these are all debates around morality. Okay, they're moral debates. Okay, about what's morally right, what's morally wrong, and who determines what is morally right, morally wrong, right? So, these things are ongoing. these debates, and they're all about issues of what is morality, how do we define right and wrong, where does it come from, who gets to decide. And so when you're talking to people and they make these comments, like that's not fair, that's not right, I want justice, that's morally wrong, that's evil, what the heck is wrong with people? You can, you can obviously tell people or talk to them or just get on some common ground that they obviously seem to know there's a difference between what is fair and unfair. They seem to know there's a difference between what is just and unjust, right? Or unjust. They seem to know there's a difference between what is morally right and morally wrong and what is evil and good. It just seems to be that way, judging by all these comments right here. So what you want to do is ask them where that comes from. Excuse me. Some people show they have some sort of moral intuitionism. What that means is that there seems to be some basic moral reactions that people have that are self-evident, meaning that they don't have to reflect on them for a long time and read a book on it. They just know intuitively some things are right and wrong. Like when they're looking at 9/11 back here, or whatever it is, they may automatically, intuitively just say that's morally wrong. That's morally evil, right? Okay. They don't need to like have a long reflection on it. And it's not inferred from anything else. Okay. It's an immediate insight or immediate grasp into moral reality. Okay. Now, what you want to do is you always want to press people on what is the standard they are using to make moral judgments by, and where does that standard come from? Because as soon as you go over here and you're constantly saying, that's not fair, that's not right, I want justice, that's morally wrong, that's evil, what the heck is wrong with those people? You're appealing to a standard that's being violated. Okay. And you need to ask people, where does that standard come from? And is there an authority behind that standard that enforces the standard? Is this your own standard, or is this society's standard, or where does the standard come from you're appealing to? Okay. And you can't have any moral disagreements on anything if there's not a standard you're appealing to. As soon as you get into a moral argument with somebody, when they start saying it's morally right to allow children to transition into whatever gender they want to, and I say it's morally wrong, we're both appealing to a moral standard. Okay. And so that would point back to the same issue. You can talk about where that standard comes from. That's what C.S. Lewis figured out in his book Mere Christianity. When he talked about the straight line, he said, I said, I used to think the universe was so unjust, but then I said, well, wait a minute, if it's unjust, I have to know what just is. There has to be, you can't call something crooked unless you know what is straight. And so he realized he needed a standard, some sort of standard to appeal to. And so that's where, he realized there was some sort of moral law that transcended humanity. So, you can appeal. Sometimes people appeal to their own standard. Sometimes people think that moral values and judgments are dependent on them, right? That they are their own standard. That they, through how they feel, what they prefer, they come up with their own moral values and judgments, okay? That's what we call individual relativism. Everybody has their own morality. Okay, everybody comes up with their own moral system. Then you have cultural relativism or social consensus, and that's where each culture determines the morality, right? And then culture kind of gathers around that and confirms that. And then, of course, we could say that the standard comes from God. God's nature is the standard of goodness. God doesn't get goodness and give it to us. He is goodness because of his nature. His nature is good. Okay. There's no standard above God. Like God has to be held to a certain standard. God is the standard. Okay. His nature is the standard of goodness. Okay. And for some people that say there is no objective standard, there's no standard, I come up with my own standard, and I'm an individual relativist, it doesn't make any sense. Because if they say morality is just each his own, each person has their own opinion about what morality is, and you can't say anything's objectively right or wrong, and each person has their own opinion on what's morally right and wrong. I mean, you just have to ask someone, okay, is it evil or wicked for someone to walk into a random house, shoot everyone in it, and steal everything in sight? Is that just your personal opinion that that is wrong, right or wrong? Is that just your own subjective opinion? Or do we know at all places at all times it's objectively wrong for someone to walk into a random house and shoot everyone and steal everything in sight? Or do we know that it's always wrong at all places and all times for a man to beat and rape a kind, innocent woman? Or it's always objectively wrong for an adult to torture an innocent child simply for the fun of it? Or it's always objectively wrong for parents to sexually abuse their children for years and years and days and years, right? So just to say that, well, we can't say anything is objectively right or wrong. It's just basically my personal opinion. I doubt you live that way. And I doubt you would say that if someone broke into your home, if someone broke into let's give an example. I'd say this to somebody, you don't think there is any kind of objective morality. I would say, what if someone broke into your house tonight, beat your family? Maybe they didn't kill them, but took a baseball bat, beat them, stole everything in your house, and then um, somehow drugged you and left you asleep while they were beating everybody. You woke up the next day, find your family beaten, almost dying, and everything was stolen. When the police officer came to you and said, if they asked you if someone said to you, well, what do you think about this? Would you say, well, it's just my personal opinion. This is wrong. What happened last night to me and my family, it's just my own personal opinion. I doubt you would say that. I think you would say, this is wicked. It's evil. It's objectively wrong. Um, the person who did this to my family violated a standard. There's a standard that they violate. Okay, then the question is, where does that standard come from? Okay. I doubt most people really live as moral relativists. Now, cultural relativism, as I said, that is the view that each morality depends on location. Whatever culture you're in, they set the standard. And so there's something we call social contract theory, where some people, um, like I said, they come up with this contract in a culture of what to do and what not to do morally. Now, the Germans kind of had this in place when the trials went on for the Nazis after the Holocaust, when the Nazis were tried in a court of law, and the Nazis just said, well, we were going by the dictates of our culture. We can't be held responsible. This is part of German culture, why we did this to the Jews and other people. And then the judge came along and said, you can't do that. Because there's a law above you that's judging you. There's a law that transcends German culture that shows that this is wrong what you did to the Jews, and you're held accountable for it. So he's basically saying you can't just appeal to your culture as some sort of way out, that this is the way the culture views morality, and you're off the hook. Because obviously, to say any culture is wrong, once again, you're going to have to appeal to a standard outside culture. So if I say German culture was wrong for what they did, I'm appealing to a standard outside of German culture. If I say what any culture does or any nation does is right or wrong, I'm appealing to a standard outside of that nation, right? A standard outside of that culture. Question is, where does that standard come from? And is there an authority behind it? Now, I talk about morality, like where people ground the standard, where the standard come from. Generally, in Christianity, we appeal to what's called divine command theory, and that means an action is good because God commands it, or action's bad because God forbids it, because it flows from the nature of God. So many Christians say, the nature of God. If God says, if God's nature is good, and like I said, if He says something, you can't do this or you can do that, that's the right thing, because God is. Certainly, His nature is good. He's all knowing and He's all wisdom, and it's rooted in the nature of God itself. And so that's what we call divine command theory. God commands it because it flows from his nature of who he is. God doesn't get morality, once again, and he doesn't like go find it, and there's no moral standard above him. He is the standard. Now, just to make sure you guys understand this, it's really important. When you're talking to people, a lot of people get confused on the whole objective subjective thing. This happens a lot in general in culture. When we say something's objective, we're saying there's a standard of morality that transcends human opinions, judgments, and biases, right? Just like if I say it's objectively true that Dallas is north of Houston, right? That's an objective truth claim. Or if I make a moral claim, shoplifting is wrong. Okay, if I say it's morally objectively wrong, that's a fact about reality, right? Okay. Now, a subjective claim would be something based on your personal feelings, preferences, or tastes, right? So if you say I prefer Donato's Pizza over Little Caesars, or I prefer the Dallas Cowboys over the Philadelphia Eagles, and Larry prefers the Philadelphia Eagles over the Dallas Cowboys, those are subjective preferences, right? It is objectively true that the Philadelphia Eagles are better than the Dallas Cowboys for sure as a team. That is an objective truth claim. But the point is that you can see the difference. A lot of people get these confused. I don't know why it's so hard. I think part of it is the dumbing down sometimes of our education system, and also that we don't teach logic, and also that we're addicted to technology and emotional fulfillment all the time, that we forget there are objective truth claims out there, okay, and moral objective truth claims, okay? So the argument would be that, just to kind of wrap this up in an argument like a syllogism form, in the form of a syllogism, objective values and duties are valid and binding, independent of human opinion. If a personal God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist, therefore a personal God exists. Now, remember that as a Christian, everybody who's a Christian or professing follower of Jesus is really what we call a moral realist. And that means that we believe that there exist things such as moral facts and moral values that are once again independent of your perception of them. That's what we talk about. The same thing as objective morality. It's the same way of saying you're a moral realist. Okay, there's some moral facts and moral values that are definitely exist independently of us. Okay, that's what objective means, independent of yourself, right? Now, there's a few other ethical theories I want to mention. One that has a long history in the history of Christianity is called natural law theory. In this system, they say that the moral standards that govern our behavior are seen in grounded in nature itself, in the nature of the world around us. That they're really God has already built these into the fabric of nature. You wouldn't need the Bible to even know them. Okay, that they're just deduced. You can deduce these moral principles from the natural world itself. So now some people think that maybe Paul is talking about this a little bit in Romans 2 when he says, when Gentiles who don't have the law by nature do what the law requires, they are law themselves, even though they do not have the law. They show that the work of the law is written on their hearts. So some people think that this has to do with maybe what Paul's talking about in Romans 2, that the non-Jewish nations, the Gentiles, have some sort of moral law written on their hearts. And Paul could be saying, once again, going back to some sort of moral intuitionism, that God has given us that, like some sort of, he's imprinted that in humans, or he's certainly placed that within humans, some sort of innate intuitive faculty that allows us to know God's basic moral demands. It could be the way God's created us, that's there. He put that within us. And Lewis saw this in his book, The Abolition of Man. He looked around all cultures, C.S. Lewis, and he said, there seems to be a general sense of same kind of concepts as murder, the views of murder distinguishing other moral issues, the notions, there's certain moral obligations humans have to each other. that are on display across all nations that seem to be universal, some sort of universal morality on some issues. So Lewis saw this as some sort of moral law that God had put in all cultures and all people. But when someone says, what is natural law? What is, going deeper on that, what natural law says is it denounces what they might say is unnatural or therefore immoral acts. Of course, the Catholic Church says contraception is an unnatural thing. I'm not really debating that tonight. But I would say that you could use this argument in like same-sex relationships. Okay, because all you ask in natural law arguments is what is natural? What does the natural world show? So if the natural law in reality shows a certain purpose to something, I mean, there seems to be the nature reveals the purpose of something, the aim of something is so obvious, then we know that, if you want to engage in a gay sexual behavior, we know that without even reading the Bible, we know that nature shows us that the human body is not designed to do that. It's not designed to engage in same-sex behavior. That is not the function or purpose of the human body. You can try it, but obviously that is not the purpose. The purpose of the natural purpose of a human body is to have procreation. Not everybody can do that. I understand that, but that doesn't take away the intended purpose that it's there. And obviously, procreation can only happen between a man and a woman, not two men and two women. So obviously nature did not give you the kind of body to make a child. If you're going to commit that act, the homosexual act, then that is not the purpose of that. So that's why when you try to use it for something it's not intended to do, not the goal of it, you end up having problems. You can have physical problems, you can get certain diseases, you can hurt yourself physically. Obviously, same thing can happen with heterosexual people if they, misuse that and obviously have too much sexual activity. Obviously, you can get diseases and things as well. But the point is that there's a certain thing that the natural world has revealed about the purpose of something. Okay, and that's what natural law is. And then utilitarianism is a huge ethical view today. This is one of the most popular ones that's seen in our culture today. It's just everywhere. It's in government, it's in big moral decisions, it's everywhere. And people live their lives this way. Morality is determined by the greatest good for the greatest number. So, whatever produces the greatest balance of benefits over harming people is a moral thing to do. And so, really, in this view, all that matters is the end game. You don't worry about the process. So, like when Spock made the statement in Star Trek, for all you Star Trek fans like I was, or still am, of the old ones, but he said the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one, right? And this is a very, very popular ethic today. And it's impossible to really fully understand the consequences of it because you can't see into the future. So you're only looking for the end goal right now, but you can't see the future consequences of that action. Only God can see them, right? And once again, there's no focus on the process. If you just get to the end result and you skip over the process, you're not seeing some of the unintended consequences there. Some things will happen. They're going along the way that you're not seeing. And so it's a lot of people live their lives. It's just, whatever, just get to the end, just get it done. Who cares about the process? All that matters is the end result. Fortunately, that can sometimes lead to real problems because then you've overlooked so many things and because you skipped over the process. And God definitely cares about the process. Another ethical system that's really popular is called emotivism. This is where people don't think moral claims are about anything truthful, but rather it's just your moral beliefs are just expressions of your personal emotions. So, when you say murder is wrong, you're just expressing your feelings, right? it's kind of like, I don't like murder. You just something you don't prefer, you do prefer, right? Just expressing your emotions. They're not really saying that murder is objectively wrong. It's not expressing a moral truth. It's mostly emotivism is mostly about I feel what is right. This is what I feel. This makes me uncomfortable or comfortable. Um, a lot more focused. I notice this in a ton of conversations with college students. They start out sentences, I just feel that. I just feel this. I just feel that. They're trying to say, I think that, but instead they're saying, I feel that. If I ask them, what do you think about this? They'll say, I just feel that, blah, 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 blah. When they should be saying, well, I think that, I think this. But they're so trained to answer or so been so immersed into saying, I feel that. I feel this. I just feel that this is right or wrong for this reason. I just feel that we should do this. I just feel that this is not true. They never, a lot of times they won't say, I think that, and here's the reason why. That's emotivism. Okay, so that's about it. I think the moral argument can be very helpful for you in conversations. I think that's a good conversational piece to use with people for sure. I think you can make a lot of headway with people on that topic because morality certainly impacts people's lives every day and they're making moral choices. So I think that that's something you really should try to utilize in conversations with others, especially in today's world, since people all the time are complaining about things, like they watch the news, they say, oh, that's not right, or that's terrible, or that's wrong. I'm like, by what standard? What standard is that morally right or morally wrong? Like, oh, can you believe that they did that? That's so wrong. Like, well, why is it wrong? Well, you just know. We just know it's wrong. Well, why? Why is it wrong? Based on what standard? Okay. So you can get a lot of mileage out of that, my opinion.